self-assurance, relator, arranger, achiever, and maximizer. My name is Matt Stevens, and I'm the CEO of the Honor Foundation. And for me, my biggest aha moment around learning my strengths was really the language surrounding them, and how before I was aware of strengths in general, I probably inherently knew what they were, but doing this really helped me verbalize it and create a narrative around myself.
I'm Darren Verisami.
I'm Brandon Miller.
And this is The Strengths Whisperer,
the show empowering leaders to create, build, and sustain great places to work.
On this episode, we've got a real treat for you. We've got Matt Stevens, who is the CEO of the Honor Foundation. Matt Stevens was a Navy captain. He was a SEAL with 26 years of active duty service. And we're going to get to hear a bit about the Honor Foundation, what their mission is, what they do, and why Matt is a people-first leader, and why the Honor Foundation is comprised of a whole bunch of people-first leaders in the work that they do, not only internally with their team, but serving the Special Operations Force community as they're transitioning back into civilian life. Matt, what a joy it is to have you on the show. Welcome aboard.
Hey, thanks guys for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Well, before we get into talking about the Honor Foundation and what it is, we've got a very unique experience to run through with Matt. Matt actually just retook the Clifton Strengths Assessment. It had been about 8 years, I think, since you last took it. I think the first time you took it, Matt, you were still in active duty. It was back in 2016, and you just took it here recently. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I took it when I was still active duty in command of one of our groups, and I just took it last week.
We've got some similarities and some differences. Brandon, what's so unique about the retake, the retest, the test and retest reliability of the assessment, and why time might be relevant for creating some shifts when we talk about things like nature and nurture?
We're often asked the question with people who take any psychometric assessment, will my results change? And when we think about that question, I think most of us would say, well, of course they will. Every person in time is going to grow and develop and hopefully become a better version of self. The first time you take the Clifton Strengths, some might say that's the purest version because it's most raw. You're not familiar with the instrument. Those results are going to tell a pretty good story about your most core strengths, the ones that are deeply embedded, genetically coded, and what we call your growth strengths. We know now, with more and more people responding to this assessment, that we're also measuring learned behaviors. And these are parts of us that we need for specific periods of time in a critical way, that when that pressure changes, that need for that strength can decline. It can become something that we don't need as much, so we can set it on the shelf, grab it again when we use it. And so with someone like Matt, looking at his results, we have a 2016 version and then a 2022 version, and we get to look at a side-by-side comparison. Now, Darren mentioned testing and retesting. Every psychometric assessment will be evaluated on the basis of test-retest reliability. Clifton Strengths actually has a very high level. In fact, typically 7 or 8 out of the top 10 will stay grouped in the top 10 of this assessment most times. In Matt's case, we're right at 7. So 7 of his top 10 from 2016 have remained constant, and some of the ones that moved around stayed still in a tight grouping around 15. So we could say that we have a pretty good view, Darren, of Matt's most dominant strengths in this test-retest opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's pretty fascinating when we get into diving into this. We've talked about the 4 domains of strengths: executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. Matt, when you were a commander in 2016, there was definitely a huge level of leadership. Now, over the course of the past 2+ years, you've been the CEO of the Honor Foundation, and you guys have gone through some pretty significant growth.
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. When I took over the CEO role of the Honor Foundation in 2019, we had 3 physical campuses and 1, we were just standing up a virtual campus. And now we have 6 physical campuses and 2 virtual campuses. So 8 total.
Why don't you just give us a quick bite-sized overview of what the Honor Foundation truly does? Because we're huge fans of the work that you do.
The Honor Foundation is a national nonprofit that is laser focused on men and women of the special operations community as they transition out of uniform into their next chapters in life. And what the Department of Defense offers, in our humble opinion, doesn't meet the standard for the men and women we serve. So we've created an executive education program that's 3 months in length. It runs them through a gamut of assessments. We have them figure out their purpose, how to talk about themselves, their strengths, give them some tactical tools, and then expose them to the art of the possible so that they have a successful and graceful transition.
Matt, and just real quick, one of the main assessments that's within the Honor Foundation's program, which I believe is called Waypoint, one of the first things they do is take the Clifton StrengthsFinder assessment. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. We find that it's an invaluable tool to get people thinking about their natural strengths and talking about it, because the members of our community often don't like talking about themselves at all. And so this is a really good tool for us to get them over that hump.
Thanks for that overview. That's going to be relevant, I think, Brandon, as we get into unpacking Matt's strengths from where he was at in 2016, as he's really taken on this CEO role since 2019. You took on that role, Matt, and then shortly thereafter, you fell into the pandemic and had to go 100% virtual and then figure out how to deliver these programs virtually and keep your team together virtually and going through that. Brandon, any other insights about Matt's strengths?
Yeah, so Matt, I'd love to ask this question. When you looked at your new results or look at them now, and you might recall 2016, what jumps off the page to you when you see that top 10 list? Some people describe, and it was my experience with strengths, reading it going, did someone follow me? Like, how does this thing get this so accurate? Do you have any of those popping off of your top 10 on this most newest result?
Well, certainly Leader and Achiever stayed on there, which didn't surprise me. I was surprised that my number one, which was Strategic in 2016, dropped down to about 14, replaced by Self-Assurance. So frankly, I was a little worried that maybe I'd become a little too egotistical and confident in myself, because I certainly don't feel that way all the time. So that's the biggest thing that jumped out at me.
It's interesting. People with high self-assurance, we typically look at them as people with very high risk thresholds. So their risk tolerance is high, and they also have a strong resilience. They have bounce back ability. That plays in self-confidence, but it also just comes through in one's certitude that I've done my research, I've done my homework, I know the decisions that I'm making, and I'll stand behind them. Come success or failure, I will own outcomes regardless of how they go. Now, in most cases, when someone moves into a CEO role, I would say that was a step up in pressure. Given that you were a special operator and what you faced in your active duty career, I think it's a different kind of pressure, perhaps.
Yeah, that's 100% accurate. And just, while you're in this community, not every day is a pressure-filled day. Not every role is a pressure-filled role. Certainly in combat and leading tactical units at times, that is super high pressure because the stakes are super high. My last role, when I was going through this process in 2016, I was in charge of about 1,700 people. I didn't have the time to be like in the weeds on everything, and I had great people around me. But now, as the CEO of the Honor Foundation, it's totally a different kind of pressure because we want to serve as many people as we can, but we're a nonprofit, so we have to bring in donations, and that's the balance. And I'm of the mindset that let's move out and do something, even if we're at the 80% mark, versus waiting until we have 100% things lined up in the perfect scenario. Because if that's the case, you'll just never move forward. So yes, I think I do have a pretty good risk tolerance.
I'm going to couple that. One of the strengths that did remain in your top 10 was Activator. It was number 5. It's now number 10, which means it's still going to play strong for you. And what you just described is a very common self-assurance activator mindset. We're not all the way there, but we're going to figure some things out as we go. And we're going to bet on the come a bit. And if we don't succeed, what those two strengths do really well is we will figure it out. We'll sort it. We'll solve it, we'll take another step. And I imagine for you in the CEO role and as a leader in special operations, that mentality has probably served your career well. Would that be accurate?
I don't know if it served me well, but that's certainly my mindset. I agree with that philosophy 100%. Let's fail fast, iterate, and then keep improving our position versus plan it to death and keep analyzing things that, you're never going to get to the 100% mark. So at some point, let's make a decision. And maybe it's because I'm a little bit older. I've had a couple rounds around the sun, but you just kind of intuitively know what's going to do okay. You're not going to fail miserably. Might not be perfect, but we'll learn along the way and then make it better.
Yeah, that's a great mentality. Something we are going to be talking about as this podcast and our show guests come on is that when a person takes this assessment, you almost think about like an x-ray. It's a moment in time that just caught how you see your strengths at that season. But something we learned in our training through this process is that you could take that top 10 that is presented in a list and really draw more like on a wheel. And the way that they actually work is you turn that wheel to use what you need when you need it. So 1 up to maybe as high as 15, they're interchangeable almost. You're going to leverage them in real life realities, mostly combined as a set, but sometimes segmented. So I wanted to comment on that self-assurance activator piece I mentioned. And you said something really important. You said, I'm not sure if it always does serve, right? Like, I don't know that always does have the outcome, because when there's people involved who have to follow us, something about those 2 strengths in particular, Matt, is that out of the 34 strengths, we know their frequency. So we know how often they're going to show up in someone's report. So for example, achiever, that's the most common strength in the world. So about 1/3 of people are going to have achiever. On the other spectrum, self-assurance is the least common. It's 34 of 34, which means is that we probably relate better to a leader's achiever because there's more of us that are going to go, hey, I get that. You got to set an example. You got to work hard. You're the one modeling, where self-assurance at times requires some explanation. Because that one, people are like, can you really be that confident, Matt? Can you really be that sure of yourself? And where activator comes is it supercharges it. Activator says, all right, enough talk. We've done all of that. We're as far as we need. It's time to make waves. It's time to move forward. And so for all of us who share these, and it happens to be that the other gentleman on here with us today also has self-assurance.
Yes, all 3 of us have self-assurance and activator.
So we may have all found the understanding that not everyone gets on board at the same rate as we might like them to. And not everyone is as comfortable with risk as we might prefer them to. And so this is where I wanted to call out, you mentioned relator. Something relators do super well, and I'm curious how you've grown this. You mentioned a few more trips around the sun. Using that human connection part, using that ability to find those points of light with different people, those points of where I can bond with you so that you're believing me, you're trusting me. How's that played out for you, Matt, using that relator strength as part of your leadership success?
I keep my friend circle pretty tight. And one of the great things about using strengths in all facets of what we do is really the people we hire and promote and bring into the Honor Foundation on the staff side. We want to make sure that we complement each other. We're pretty small. We have 28 employees. The leadership team is 5. And it's served me well to really have a trusted circle of not all like-minded people who I value their input and I'll take their input. And certainly there's no bullets flying in this role. So generally we don't have to make split snap decisions because we have a little bit of time to think about it, but we do have to move out. We can't analyze forever. So I do try to gather input from those trusted agents in my circle and then make the best decisions with the information at hand.
Matt, to follow up on what you just said with the input, do you do best if somebody is not quite seeing eye to eye with you, if they're comfortable pushing back, kind of standing their ground?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, I value that tremendously because self-assurance is number one in this round. I think that I work best when I get all that input, and I certainly don't want yes men or women around me because I don't think I have all the answers. I was in the military for 26 years, not running a nonprofit. It is a business. We have to bring in revenue and we have a product. And so it's not new anymore, but it's certainly newer territory for me. And I don't proclaim to have all the answers.
Picking up on the point that Matt just made, and what Brandon was getting at earlier with self-assurance and activator. Matt has a lot of influencing strengths here that are in his mix. 2 additional influencing strengths came into his top 10 in this round here. And what's fascinating when we look at a number 1 self-assurance and a number 6 command, these strengths can communicate naturally at a volume 1 in terms of we have to do this, or what they believe to be a volume 1. But because they're such rare strengths, when others hear them in the world, and there's been such little practice in working with folks that have self-assurance and activator and command, that combination of those 3, it can sound as if we're fully convinced of an idea. But these strengths, remember, naturally present with the level of influence because they naturally are working to impact and move people forward. These strengths naturally connect through people to move a cause and a mission forward. And if there's a guy that I know that believes in his mission of what he's doing and what the organization stands for, it's Matt. When we look at Matt's command and self-assurance, I think it's important for us to understand, even though these strengths present with a lens of what can be perceived as authority, they really value the ability to push back. And that's an important piece for us to kind of look at here. Brandon, what are your thoughts on seeing Maximizer move up from 23 to 5 from 2016 to 2022, and see Belief? I think that moved from the number 15 spot to number 7.
Yeah, Matt, I don't know how much you've been able to read on Maximizer, but it is described by some as the StrengthsFinder strength, meaning it's the strength that takes this concept of strengths-based development and teaching people how to focus here, and it very much gravitates toward it, gets its hands on it, and moves it forward because it thinks of optimization. It thinks of the phrase good to great, taking something great, good, let's upgrade. Let's keep advancing. And I hear that coming through in some of your comments, but curious because you've had a pretty good experience and you're leveraging this tool inside of your organization. Do you think Maximizer is one that came up because you needed it, came up because it's a part of what you're doing as your work? How are you seeing that one by chance?
I think it probably came up because I was exposed to this process initially as a student going through, but then we brought you guys in to help us with our employee engagement, and then really buying into using strengths-based leadership as a way to move an organization forward. So it's probably coming from an awareness that it works and just trying to use that in my day-to-day life, in my leadership opportunities, and then really encouraging everybody else to do it, allowing those who are super passionate about it to run with it in our organization. Because I am not like a strengths coach or anything like that, but we have several in our organization, and we've used that to great effect to talk about each other, really point out what's great about people and where the strengths show up. And so it's probably the awareness and then trying to leverage that tool because I think it works.
And since you mentioned employee engagement, Gallup has done a lot of measuring around the impact of a strengths approach to developing people and the volume or the percentage of people who will engage at work. And what they tell us is that when we focus on a person's strengths, they're 6 times more likely to be engaged than if we were using a conventional model that would say, hey, instead of your strengths, I just want to figure out all the things you don't do well, and then we're just going to drill down on those and make you great at things you hate. So that mentality of combining strengths and engagement is something that many maximizers catch, but Darren brought up Belief. So Belief was 15, and now Belief is sitting very high at number 7. And this has to do with core values. So very much people with high belief have altruism, causes they care deeply about. And I think you describe what you do as a cause you care very deeply about it. You mentioned we're stepping in a gap to serve men and women that are otherwise not being served. And I wonder if that belief is just shaping this mindset that we got to grab everything that works because we're, in many cases, providing such a critical core function for these people that are truly service-minded. They're heroes in many respects. They have laid it down, literally, for the service and freedom of others. And so here we are now serving them back. So I wonder how, when you think about that belief and what you're in now, how you see that taking shape.
Yeah, that is the core of our essence, quite frankly. I mean, the mission and the passion of what we do is to serve others with honor for life. And everybody that we bring onto the team is 100% behind that. And so belief is huge in what we do because, again, we're a nonprofit. So no one's going to walk away from the Honor Foundation being a millionaire or independently wealthy. So it's really all about the mission and the purpose of what we do. And that is 100% belief.
Matt, I want to change gears a little bit more into the organization on the whole. And something that you said that I think is very interesting and it's important was in 2016, when you first went through the program, when you've seen fellows going through the program, and if I'm not mistaken, by the end of 2022, you'll be just shy of 2,000 graduates from the fellowship program. So when we look at that, day one, they're stepping into the fellowship. They're going through it. They're taking the Strengths Finder, and then they got to get comfortable telling the story and like embracing and owning these things. And Brandon mentioned this is not necessarily a group that's comfortable talking about these elements of the things that they do well in front of others. Can you share anything about the transformation that you've seen in any fellows or any members that are now a part of the Honor Foundation in going through this journey and how it's helped them be successful in their transition from uniform to civilian life?
We see that all the time, quite frankly, on day one. It is a fairly skeptical group. By and large, they're losing their identity. And if you're a member of the special ops community, generally identity is tied into what you do. I'm a SEAL, I'm a Green Beret, I'm a Ranger, I'm a Marine Raider, right? That's it, right? They like to talk to each other, or we like to talk to each other, but we don't like to talk about ourselves outside of that circle at all. And so getting over the hump of talking about yourself and advocating for yourself is one of the key tasks that we have in using the Strengths Finder and the language associated with it. And then we have a storytelling night as well, really ties into it. And I've seen it hundreds of times where somebody comes in with a pretty well-defined path. I want to go to Wall Street because I want to make a lot of money. Once they actually figure out who they are using this tool as a good jumping off point, then they really figure out, okay, well, I could go do that, but I really don't like doing that. And it would exhaust me because it's number 33, 34 that I would have to leverage all the time. I'd rather do what I'm good at and what I like to do. And then a lot of times we see them transform their thinking into what their next career is going to be using this as the first step.
So taking that from the community that we serve to then how you've grown and scaled internally within the Honor Foundation, you've talked a lot about how you have gone through measuring employee engagement. You've done that regularly, utilizing Gallup's Q12 process and measuring that. How has measuring employee engagement and using Clifton Strengths, how's that helped you to grow and scale the organization and increase team awareness or build complementary partnerships?
Well, bringing the awareness across all the pillars within the Honor Foundation has allowed us to really increase communications a lot, task or ask others to step in because they love doing it and it's going to fill their cup, and just be aware of what somebody might not really like to do because it's not a strength. And so certainly doing the Q12 survey every year is a good tool for the leadership team, but if that's all we did and didn't execute and do anything about it, it would be kind of a pointless exercise. So we get together once in person every year because we have 28 employees now. We used to do it twice a year. And we will always do a strengths-based exercise within that. We've done it the last 2 years in a row. And we actually just changed our performance review format to going away from what you described earlier, the once a year, twice a year, kind of like, here's what you're doing not so great, to a strengths-based methodology, with define the roles, quick connects, check-ins, developmental coaching, and then the formal progress review. So nothing should be a surprise during that. So we're really trying to build on it. And because you even said, I think, nobody likes performance reviews. Maybe it's 14% of people are inspired by those or believe it's really worth the time. So that's why we've changed. And it's actually made it cleaner, more streamlined, and one of those things that's not like, oh gosh, I got to sit down with my manager now and go through this terrible process.
I want to capture something, Matt, you just said for the listeners. If that was all we did, it would be pointless. And I really want to pause on that because we have met and worked with leaders who will take the time and invest the money into doing a survey, and they did a survey. And there isn't the hard work behind the survey of, well, what do these results mean? And what action steps are we going to take? And what's going to change to make us better, to improve, to grow? And I want to commend you on that, because it really is statistically valid that if you take a survey and you ask people what you think, and then you do nothing, you're better off never having taken the survey. And then if you ask them what they think and they tell you, so you go through the first two steps, but then you don't actually make good on the promise, you're really better off not doing the survey. And so I want to commend you, because that really is a key to, are we operationalizing feedback? It's a question sometimes we'll add to the survey when we give it. Last year when you took this, did your leaders take action on what you said? And when that result comes in high, we know engagement scores, they fly, because no one expects leaders to be perfect. We just ask you to make progress. So really important point, Darren. I think that is good to hammer home for our listeners.
Do measure and do something with it. I got to quote a really wise man that I spoke to when I was preparing for this conversation. He said, you got to keep mowing the grass regularly. It's a habit. That wise man is Matt Stevens, the CEO of the Honor Foundation. And the fact that culture and employee engagement is not a box that you check, it's an actual habit that we have to build, and we have to keep making progress. Matt, you've highlighted some of the ways that you're doing that. You've formalized the ways that reviews are going through. You've also, if I'm not mistaken, you've gotten into a place where employees and managers are now having monthly one-to-one check-ins and actually goal setting and tying those to different people's strengths. Can you share anything as to how you guys have done that in your system?
Interestingly, right after the pandemic started, March of 2020, we started doing, with all employees, a Monday morning checkup from the neck up, right? To see how your weekend was and see how you're doing. Because early on, it was a pretty stressful time for some. And then, of course, our leadership team, I encourage them, because we're all over the country, to travel and see the people that they might not see in person, and enhance the personal relationships as well as the Zoom virtual relationships. Because I think you have to establish that in person to make it truly effective, I think, or at least cultivate it, mow the grass. And so I do that. I spend a lot of time on the road, whether it's just, driving to Fort Bragg or Camp Lejeune to go to class for 2 hours or 3 hours. That's 10 hours of driving for me, but it's worth it. Flying everybody out to San Diego once a year to work on our strategy, but the real intent's to get together and mow the grass and build the relationships. Those are just a couple of the things that we do, but it's that personal engagement, spending the time as a leader. It's making yourself approachable so that, it's not the CEO coming in, it's Matt, and I can tell Matt anything. And I want that open and honest feedback. And I think everybody appreciates it. And it's not me trying to usurp anybody's authority if they're below me. It's really just leveling out the playing field so that everybody has a voice.
Brandon, you ever heard of commander's intent?
I've heard that term in the past, but I'd be very curious to hear how Matt defines that.
I am certainly not the owner of that title. It's just one of those things in the military where you have to understand what your boss really wants you to do. And you have to understand what your boss's boss and your boss's boss's boss, really what their intent is, so that you can operate within those parameters and just go out and do it. You don't have to ask for permission, because then it becomes a hierarchical and very stale and stagnated organization. So the way I like to do it is exactly that. Hey, here's the direction we want to go. I'm going to lay the train track and just stay within the tracks. And if you're generally trying to do the right thing, don't even bother me. Don't ask for permission. Just go do it. And if you get sideways, then I got your back. But if you're going like 90 degrees out, then we have to have a different conversation, because that wasn't my intent. And if you interpreted that, then either I suck as a communicator or something skewed inside of you and you did it on purpose. So that's kind of the way I define it.
In our engagement language, we talk a lot about the power of expectation or level setting for each team member, and how it is so interesting that out of a group of 28 employees, if it was an unhealthy organization, we would probably expect about half of them wouldn't from day to day know what's expected of them. In a healthy organization, you're going to see that number get to 80, 90, almost 100% could say, doesn't matter the day of the week, doesn't matter the time of day. I know what my role is. I'm clear on my expectations. And that's why you mow the grass, right? That's why you check in. Because if we find out that there's something between us that isn't clear, I really appreciate those Monday checkup from the neck ups, because that's such a great way to make sure, do we both know what you're working on this week? And are we both in alignment there? Because I don't want you unclear. So I appreciate how that sentiment matches up with what you're measuring with your engagement surveys.
Brandon, as we've had the conversation with Matt, and you look at his Clifton Strengths results, Matt's Clifton Strengths results, and the shifts that we have seen from 2016 to now, I'm just curious from your perspective, are there any insights or ahas that you've had just from the coaching chair that are relevant to share?
Yeah, so one of your enduring strengths, Matt, was responsibility was 4. Now it sits at 8. So it's right in that same space. And people with high responsibility, there's dependability, there's loyalty, there's integrity, and then keyword, there's ownership. When given a trust, people with high responsibility must prove faithful. They must follow through. They cannot not do it. And I did want to ask you this question because some have called it the leader's curse. When you're the leader and you have high responsibility, it's, I'm good for it. I'm going to follow through. I'm going to be that person. But sometimes that costs me on the back end. Sometimes that's going to put more stress, more of a difficulty in other places in my life. I'm wondering, as you've transitioned from 16 to 22, the role you're in now, how are you managing some of that natural stress that comes with that particular strength?
That's a great question. I almost think that you build in stress inoculation over time, just kind of used to it. Like I realize now, and it didn't come naturally at first, that I can't possibly physically do everything, but I have to prioritize and I'll get the most important stuff done first. And I'm going to trust my people to get it done too, and just lay out clear expectations, as we've talked about before, and not wait till the end to figure out if it's done or not, but do some periodic reviews where it's like, oh, hey, how's it going? Let's talk about it, so that the employee doesn't put a ton of work into it if they're going off track, and you can make adjustments along the way. But I think I'm just kind of used to it now, and I'm okay with it. And it's a matter of prioritization and making sure that I do this for myself, and I encourage everybody on my team to do it. Take time to recharge, whether it's PT or spending time with your kids or going on vacation. Go do it. Like, it's not optional. Carve out that time to do something to recharge and make sure you're good to go.
I appreciate you saying that. And that, I promise that wasn't a test, but you answered it correctly. It wasn't a test, but you aced it, Matt. Good job. Matt's number 3 strength on this assessment is number 6 on his previous, is arranger. And something that arrangers do really well is they're very comfortable in allowing other people to shine in their strengths. They're very comfortable wanting to collaborate, create a collaborative culture where, as you said it really well, I can't possibly do it all. There is this reality, though, that some of the best leaders we work with, they're great orchestrators. They're good at aligning people in the right roles to see them succeed. And when you combine it with that maximizer that jumped up, it's where you see their strengths. And why wouldn't I put you in this chair where I know you're going to be at your best? It levels off, my role to your role, and it helps us be successful. And ultimately, going back to belief, it's how we're going to fulfill the mission. We got to coordinate. So great job, Matt. That's an A+ on that one. You called it out perfect.
Matt, before we wrap up, there's a question I just want to ask you, because I think your breadth of leadership is so unique and so different from many others. And I want to just ask you, along your whole leadership journey, what have been the hardest or most fun choices that you've been able to make along the way to carving out your path to where you're at today?
I think the hardest and the most fun actually don't relate to myself at all, but I think it's the hardest are always dealing with people. And if somebody is really just not meeting the mark and you have to let somebody go or alter their career trajectory because they're not in the right place, I mean, that's a terrible thing that I don't think anybody enjoys. But not doing it is even worse. And so I've gotten Again, maybe some calluses built up over time from doing it incorrectly, but I think it's actually best to be honest with people if they need to go in a different direction on a career or a function. On the flip side of that, the most fun things is mentoring and developing leaders who are going to be way better than you at the same job, a year or two down the road, and really helping them and doing whatever you can to put them on the right path, get them promoted, make them better leaders, and seeing them succeed down the road. That's been super, super fulfilling for me, is seeing some people that used to work for me now crushing it in the SEAL teams and the special ops community, even in the Honor Foundation, and having employees that have started as admin assistants now, senior directors, and just continuing to grow and thrive and take on every responsibility. And it's super rewarding to see that.
I've had the privilege of seeing a little bit of that firsthand. And I think what has been incredible as people have risen through the ranks is the fact that commitment to the mission, they continue to pass that downstream to anybody that's new. And that just becomes a huge part of the culture. And there's a willingness to get it done and a sense of camaraderie and collaboration that's showing up more and more. And working in a remote environment and growing rapidly creates its own set of challenges, but there's a commitment to working through those things to find the way. Matt, as we are wrapping up, the Honor Foundation, as you mentioned, is a nonprofit. It's relied on support, help from coaches, from different professionals that are actually sitting through mock interviews. Tell us a little bit more about if people want to get involved with that, or if they want to connect with you directly, how they would go about doing that.
So they can learn a lot more about the Honor Foundation at our website, honor.org. And there's ways to get a hold of us and contact with us and to volunteer on that website. We have professional faculty that teaches a bunch of the class. We have our own staff that also does a lot of coaching and mentoring and organizing, but we rely heavily on volunteers. We use coaches, mentors, volunteers for reviewing resumes, volunteers for doing mock interviews, somebody willing to have a cup of coffee with a veteran transitioning out. So I just kind of look at it like this: time, talent, or treasure. Now, we'd love to have your time if you're willing to volunteer. I'd encourage you to hire our talent and give us your talent if you have a specialty. And then treasure, of course, we're a nonprofit, so we certainly appreciate any support in the financial realm.
Matt, I just want to thank you so much for joining us, sharing your story of leadership and your journey. For our listeners out there, are you ready to discover your strengths to accelerate into life like Matt has? We believe in this path so much that we're offering our listeners the opportunity to discover their top 5 Clifton strengths. You can email us at Brandon, BRANDON, at 34strong.com. And that is the number 34. You're going to want to include in the subject line, top 5, to request your StrengthsFinder code.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Strengths Whisperer. What did you take away from the conversation with Matt? We'd love to know. Just email us at Brandon at 34strong.com. Again, if you are ready to discover your top 5 strengths, include top 5 in the subject line.